Welcome back to Animal Quests. Today we're looking at 7 film productions where ignored warnings and split-second decisions turned active sets into fatal incidents. From a stunt coordinator who walked into a stone structure mid-storm and found a Bengal tiger already inside, to a filmmaker who left his crew behind and walked toward a wild brown bear for a better shot. Let's start with the first story, where a film crew ignored a confirmed shark sighting in False Bay, South Africa, and sent 4 stunt divers into the water anyway. It was June 14, 2026, in the cold, murky water of False Bay, South Africa, where the morning had opened overcast and still. Overnight currents had pulled sediment-heavy water across the filming zone, dropping visibility beneath the surface to somewhere between 10 and 15 feet. The production was a survival thriller filming its most expensive underwater sequence, involving stunt divers moving through an artificial submerged shipwreck set. The schedule had already slipped twice. The filming permit expired within 48 hours. Poor weather was forecast for the rest of the week, and the marine support crew was contracted only through Friday. 5 stunt divers had been assigned to the sequence. Thayer Vossen, 43, coordinated the operation from the surface. Brennick Solari, 28, Corwin Dragor, 31, Tavern Kest, 35, and Osric Vale, 33, were the 4 entering the water. Merrick Halden, 55, served as the production's marine safety consultant, a former research vessel captain with decades of experience in South African coastal waters. Brennick's position matters. In stunt work, reputation often goes to those willing to take the risk. Local operators had logged shark sightings near seal colonies along the southern edge of the bay in the days before filming. Merrick recommended keeping the dedicated recovery vessel at anchor within the zone at all times and advised postponing if conditions deteriorated. Management concluded existing procedures were adequate to continue. That morning, the recovery vessel had been reassigned to collect replacement lighting equipment damaged earlier in the week. It had not returned by the time diving began. 30 minutes before the dive, a spotter observed a large dorsal fin approximately 200 yards from the set. When it disappeared, management determined the risk remained acceptable and authorized the dive. A confirmed sighting, poor visibility, no recovery vessel. The outcome was being invited in. Brennick, Corwin, Tavern, and Osric entered the water together and moved into position around the shipwreck structure. Great white sharks hunt using a single explosive ambush strike from depth, accelerating upward with enough force to be nearly impossible to detect before contact. In water below 15 feet of visibility, a diver in a dark wetsuit moving along a submerged structure produces a silhouette the animal is wired to pursue. It does not distinguish. It commits. At 9:15 in the morning, Brennick had moved slightly away from the group while repositioning a guide marker along the outer edge of the set. A large great white surged from below and struck him with full force, inflicting catastrophic injuries to his torso and lower body. Emergency recall signals fired immediately. Corwin and Tavern were closest and moved toward him at once. As they worked to secure Brennick and pull him toward the recovery line, the blood, movement, and deploying flotation equipment kept the shark close. It made a second high-speed pass through the group. Corwin sustained severe injuries to one leg. Tavern suffered major trauma to his shoulder and upper arm. Osric was filming from another position near the wreck when the recall reached him. As he moved toward the group to assist, the shark made one final brief pass. The bite caught his lower leg before the animal disappeared into deeper water. The entire sequence lasted only a few minutes. 4 stuntmen injured in one unraveling emergency. The shark struck once and stayed close because everything happening in that water told it to. The rest followed from the chaos. All 4 were brought toward the surface simultaneously. During the evacuation, Corwin became entangled in a temporary guide cable left attached to the shipwreck frame after an equipment relocation earlier that week. Already losing blood rapidly, he became trapped long enough for rescuers to lose visual contact in near-zero visibility caused by disturbed sediment. He was eventually located and freed, but the combination of blood loss, entanglement, and time underwater had already decided the outcome. Corwin Dragor died before reaching shore. Brennick Solari was declared dead shortly after being brought aboard the support vessel. Tavern survived after extensive surgery. Osric survived following multiple reconstructive procedures. 1 shark, a few minutes, 2 dead. The attack happened in the water. The mistake happened on land. Investigators cited the recovery vessel's absence, the unsecured guide cable, and the decision to continue diving after the morning sighting as primary contributing factors. The film was permanently abandoned. Footage recovered from underwater equipment was reviewed during the inquiry but never publicly released, with the production company citing active litigation and the wishes of both families. The production believed that managing a checklist was the same as managing real risk, but the next story shows that even dry land offers no protection when a Bengal tiger is already inside the room you just walked into. It was September 7th, 2016, on an outdoor fantasy film set in the South African interior, where the afternoon had started warm and clear before a line of dark clouds pushed in hard from the west. By mid-afternoon, the wind had strengthened significantly, and what had been a productive shooting day was rapidly becoming a race to secure everything before the rain arrived. The production had been using a trained Bengal tiger, sourced from a licensed animal action company, that regularly supplied big cats to international film production. The animal had never previously escaped containment, and had performed without incident across multiple scenes. Thorne Vallis, 42, was the lead stunt coordinator with nearly 2 decades of experience across film and television, including several previous productions involving trained animals. 20 years of experience creates expertise. Sometimes it also creates overconfidence. As the storm intensified, departments moved quickly to lock down cameras, lighting rigs, and props. Animal handlers began preparing the tiger for transport back to its enclosure. The emergency breakdown moved fast, responsibilities overlapped, and communication fractured under the noise of the wind. Somewhere in that window, a transport gate was left unsecured. The tiger moved through it and into an unfinished stone structure on the edge of the set. The animal had retreated there to shelter from the approaching storm, and was lying behind a partially collapsed interior wall when Thorne entered the building alone. Several specialized stunt props needed for the following week's filming were stored inside, and Thorne had volunteered to retrieve them before conditions worsened. One unsecured gate during a storm breakdown. That is the entire initiating event. Everything else followed from 30 seconds of inattention. Bengal tigers commonly weigh between 400 and 550 pounds and can approach 10 feet in length. They are ambush hunters that rely on explosive short-range acceleration and a crushing bite to the neck or throat. Familiarity with humans raises the threshold for defensive or predatory responses in a trained animal, but it does not eliminate them. A sudden entry through a doorway in a confined space with wind-driven noise and low light is exactly the kind of stimulus that overrides conditioning built over years. The tiger reacted the moment Thorne came through the doorway. The attack caused catastrophic injuries before anyone could reach him. Crew members heard shouting almost immediately and moved toward the structure, but the animal was still inside when they arrived and nobody could safely enter. A radio call went out and nearby handlers arrived almost immediately, working to draw the tiger away using air horns, distraction targets, and trained recall commands. By the time the animal was secured and responders reached Thorne, his injuries were unsurvivable. He died at the scene. The crew was close. The handlers responded fast. None of it mattered, because the attack happened in seconds, inside a room nobody knew the tiger was in. Investigators determined the unsecured transport gate during the weather emergency was the single initiating failure. The tiger had not displayed any prior aggression. It had sheltered in an enclosed space, been startled in darkness and wind, and responded accordingly. Production was suspended for several months while authorities reviewed the circumstances. Investigators also examined the animal action company's transport and containment procedures during adverse weather operations. Footage from the production day was held as formal evidence throughout the investigation and was never publicly released, with both the studio and the Vallis family requesting the material remain sealed. Thorne trusted his experience, but the next story proves even an open battlefield set becomes deadly when a startled elephant has nowhere to go. It was November 13, 2018, on a sprawling outdoor film set built along a wide river plain in Southeast Asia, where the late morning sat heavy with humidity, and the air carried the smell of dry earth and cordite from hours of pyrotechnic rehearsals. The set stretched across nearly half a mile of open ground, constructed to replicate an ancient battlefield, and by midday it was operating at full capacity. The production was a historical war epic committed heavily to practical filmmaking. Lyric Voss, 34, was the production designer responsible for the physical environment of every scene. She held a strong conviction that real animal, real terrain, and real scale made historical productions more convincing than anything digital effects could replicate. That philosophy had shaped every major decision on this film, including the choice to feature multiple trained Asian elephants in the battle sequences. That conviction made her exceptional at her job. It also placed her on a set where live elephants and pyrotechnics were separated only by planning and control. The elephants had been sourced from a licensed animal handling facility with experience supplying working animals to regional film productions. The animals had completed numerous takes across several filming days without incident, and confidence on set had grown with each successful sequence. Pyrotechnic charges were used throughout the day to simulate artillery impacts and battlefield explosions. Earlier that morning, one charge had been repositioned to accommodate a revised camera angle. The adjustment had not been formally reviewed against the approved safety distances from the nearest animal. Nobody flagged it before the sequence began. Asian elephants commonly weigh between 6,000 and 9,000 pounds and can reach speeds of 15 to 25 miles per hour in short bursts. They are highly intelligent and acutely sensitive to sudden concussive force. A detonation close enough to register as a physical pressure wave rather than a distant sound triggers a fear response that overrides years of conditioning and handler commands almost almost instantly. At full speed, an animal of that size moving through a populated set cannot be redirected in time. When the reposition charge detonated during one of the larger battle sequences, the nearest elephant reacted immediately. Most crew members moved toward designated safety positions. Lyric was near a large prop structure on the edge of the main action corridor when the blast went off. The structure had partially collapsed during the sequence. Rather than moving towards safety, she stayed to secure it. The elephant bolted directly through the corridor. It struck the edge of the prop structure as it surged forward, sending sections of it collapsing inward. Lyric was struck by the animal's shoulder and knocked to the ground, and in its continued forward surge, the elephant trampled over her before handlers could pull it off. She was also caught beneath part of the collapsing structure. She died at the scene before medical personnel reached her. She stayed for a prop structure. It was a decision that took seconds and carried consequences that couldn't be reversed. Production was suspended while investigators reviewed the incident. The inquiry focused on the repositioned charge, the absence of a formal reapproval process when effects placements were adjusted on the day, and the lack of a secondary safety corridor along the edge of the action zone. No single department was identified as solely responsible. Following the incident, several productions in the region subsequently increased separation distances between live animals and pyrotechnic effects, and insurers began requiring additional risk assessments before authorizing similar sequences. Footage from the sequence was preserved as evidence and never publicly released. The production company and the Voss family both requested the material remain sealed. Lyric believed real scale made films more honest, but the next story shows that a desire for authenticity becomes something else entirely when an underwater cinematographer steps into an East African river to reframe a shot and a Nile crocodile is already moving. It was June 22, 2017, along a slow-moving river in East Africa, where the late afternoon light had turned the water a flat bronze color and the air sat thick and still above the surface. The river ran wide and shallow in section, narrowing into deeper channels further downstream, and the banks were dense with reed grass that made it difficult to see more than a few yards in either direction along the waterline. The production was a survival thriller built around sequences showing a large Nile crocodile stalking prey from below the surface. The decision had been made early in pre-production to capture authentic footage using remote camera housings, pole-mounted rigs, and fixed underwater placements set when the animal was absent from the area. Zephyr Corvin, 29, was the underwater cinematographer hired to manage that operation. He had built a reputation filming dangerous wildlife up close for documentaries and adventure productions, and producers had sought him out because he consistently delivered footage other cinematographers would not attempt. That reputation matters. When someone becomes known for taking risks others avoid, those risks can start feeling like part of the job. The production had spent several days filming along the river with a local guide crew familiar with the crocodile activity in that stretch of water. The guides tracked the animal's last known position and monitored likely surfacing areas during each session. Multiple successful shooting days had passed, and the footage was strong. The guides had been consistent in one particular instruction throughout, that the shallow channel running close to the reed bank was an active approach corridor, and that nobody was to enter that section of the water under any circumstances. Zephyr had grown increasingly dissatisfied with the camera placement. The approved shooting positions kept the equipment at a distance he felt was costing the footage its impact. Over the previous 2 days, he had pushed to move closer, and the guides had declined each time. The guides knew the river better than anyone there. When they said don't go, that wasn't caution, it was expertise. On June 22nd, with the afternoon light falling at an angle he considered ideal, Zephyr made the decision himself. While the crew was preparing equipment for the next setup and the guides were occupied further along the bank, he entered the shallow water along the reed line to reframe an underwater housing. Nobody authorized it. Nobody saw him go in. Nile crocodiles are ambush predators, with large males commonly reaching 13 to 16 feet and exceeding 1,000 pounds. They track movement from below the surface with precision and cover the final distance to a target in under a second. In shallow, reed-lined channels, they are nearly invisible until contact is made. They do not investigate cautiously. They seize and immediately use a sustained rolling motion to drag the target into deeper water, where resistance and orientation become impossible within moments. The crocodile moved from downstream without surfacing visibly. The strike came without warning. The animal seized Zephyr and pulled him into the channel within seconds. Guides responded immediately when they heard the disturbance, but the speed of the attack and the depth of the channel made intervention impossible. A tripod and surface marker were recovered near the point of entry. Zephyr was not. He was 29 years old and genuinely skilled at what he did. The guides told him not to go in. He went in anyway, alone, while nobody was watching. A search effort effort was conducted over the following day. Remains were recovered downstream. Investigators concluded that Corvin had entered a section of shoreline the local guides had repeatedly identified as a high-risk crocodile access point, without authorization and without informing anyone on the crew. The animal had behaved exactly as expected in that environment. Production was halted for several weeks while authorities reviewed the circumstances. A camera housing recovered near the entry point was collected as part of the investigation. Investigators confirmed the device had recorded material in the moments before the attack, but it was never publicly released out of respect for Corvin's family and due to the graphic nature of the footage. Zephyr believed a better angle was worth the risk, but the next story shows that even dry land near a riverbank offers no real margin when a location manager steps between a hippopotamus and the water it is trying to reach. It was August 5, 2020, along a river system in Zambia, where the evening light had dropped low over the water and the air had cooled just enough to bring the wildlife down from the surrounding vegetation toward the banks. The river moved slowly here, cutting through wide stretches of open floodplain, broken by dense patches of tall grass and thorn bush. It was the kind of location that looked calm and manageable from a distance and concealed almost everything that mattered up close. The production was a wildlife adventure film centered on authentic footage of wild hippopotamuses moving between the river and their grazing grounds. There were no trained animals, no handlers, and no containment. The crew was working around fully wild animals in their natural habitat, which had been the deliberate creative choice from the beginning. Orion Hesk, 38, was the location manager responsible for positioning equipment and personnel before each shoot. He had spent years placing crews in remote and demanding environments and had developed a strong instinct for what a location needed to look like before cameras rolled. Location managers are the people who arrive first and leave last. They are also, by definition, the people furthest ahead of the group when something goes wrong. The production had secured the services of a small regional guide outfit familiar with the specific hippo population along that stretch of river. The guides had identified several heavily used paths the animals regularly followed between their grazing areas and the water, and had established viewing distances for the crew based on those routes. Several successful filming days had passed without incident. Each evening that went smoothly made the established distances feel more negotiable than they actually were. As the project continued, camera operators began requesting positions closer to the movement paths to capture more dramatic footage. Orion had been adjusting crew placements each evening to accommodate those requests, gradually narrowing the buffer between the filming positions and the areas the hippos routinely crossed. That gradual narrowing is the part that rarely gets examined. Nobody made a single reckless decision. The margin just got smaller every day until there was not enough of it left. On the evening of August 5th, Orion moved approximately 50 yards ahead of the crew with one local guide to finalize camera positions before the hippos began their nightly transition back toward the river. The light was fading and the tall grass along the bank reduced visibility to a short distance in most directions. While marking a camera position, Orion stepped beyond the guide's immediate line of sight. Hippopotamuses are among the heaviest land animals on Earth, with adults commonly weighing between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds. Despite their size, they can reach speeds of up to 20 miles per hour over short distances on land. They are aggressively territorial around their water access routes and will charge without hesitation when anything places itself between them and the water they are moving toward. That response is not triggered by noise or sudden movement. It is triggered by position alone. The guide spotted movement in the grass and shouted a warning. Orion turned toward the sound, but the hippo was already charging from less than 30 feet away. The animal struck him before he could retreat, knocking him to the ground. It then seized him in its jaws and inflicted catastrophic crushing injuries to his torso and pelvis before withdrawing. Guides and crew reached him within moments of the animal moving off, but the injuries were unsurvivable. Orion Hesk died before evacuation could be organized, 30 feet. That is roughly the distance between a person and the animal by the time anyone could react. In that grass, at that light level, 30 feet is nothing. Production was suspended and filming was permanently relocated to a lower risk section of the river system. Investigators interviewed crew members and guides and concluded that filming positions had gradually moved closer to the animal's preferred routes over several days without a formal reassessment of risk. The review identified cumulative decision-making across multiple departments as a contributing factor but found no evidence of deliberate safety violations. Orion wasn't careless. He was slightly out of position in terrain where slight mistakes aren't forgiven. Footage from that evening was collected by investigators and withheld from public release, with the production company citing the graphic nature of the recording and the ongoing review of the incident. Orion was separated from the guide by only a few yards, but the next story shows that even standing beside a trained lion with handlers present offers no protection the moment a concealed barrier is removed, and there is nothing left between the actor and the animal. It was April 18, 2014, on an outdoor film set in the South African interior, where the afternoon light sat sharp and dry over open scrub and pale rock. The air was warm and nearly still, the kind of afternoon that makes a set feel relaxed and productive, which is precisely the kind of atmosphere that makes people comfortable enough to make decisions they otherwise would not. The production was a historical adventure film several weeks into shooting. It featured a trained African lion in a central role, an adult male sourced from a licensed animal action facility that had supplied big cats to regional and international productions for years. The animal had appeared in commercials, documentary features, and 2 previous films without serious incident. Vesper Cade, 37, was the lead actor, widely regarded in the industry as genuinely fearless on set. He had built his reputation partly on refusing to rely on safety systems when he believed a scene could be done without them. That fearlessness made him stand out. It also put him in the situations where fatal mistakes become possible. The production had successfully completed multiple scenes using a concealed steel barrier carefully positioned between Vesper and the animal and dressed out of the camera frame. The arrangement had worked cleanly across several days. Vesper had grown increasingly vocal about his belief that the barrier was restricting his movement and making his performance look unnatural. He pushed for more direct interaction with the lion, and the handlers objected each time. The production was running behind schedule. Under mounting pressure, the director and producer agreed to a modified setup for a single close-up shot. The animal coordinator reluctantly signed off with the condition that additional handlers remain positioned close to the animal throughout. The barrier was partially removed, and the lion was brought into position under handler supervision with no physical separation between it and Vesper. Multiple people agreed to that setup. That is important. It was not one actor overruling everyone in the room. It was a chain of compromises made by professionals who had watched several safe days go by and convinced themselves one more would be fine. African lions are the second largest big cat in the world, with adult males commonly weighing between 330 and 550 pounds. They are predators by instinct, regardless of how many years they have spent around people. Captive raised lions that have performed reliably on set retain those instincts fully. They can become aroused by sudden movement, proximity shifts, and unfamiliar behavior patterns. Training manages that arousal under controlled conditions. It does not eliminate it, and no one can say with certainty what was going through the animal's mind in that moment. The lion appeared calm through the initial part of the setup, confident in the animal's composure. Vesper turned and moved away to deliver a line. The change in his position and movement altered the animal's focus, and with the barrier removed, there was nothing preventing direct contact. The lion charged within seconds. The attack reached the back of his neck and upper shoulder before handlers could intervene. Additional crew moved in immediately with poles and deterrents and pulled the animal back. Vesper was alive when they reached him, but had suffered catastrophic cervical trauma and severe blood loss. A medical helicopter had been placed on standby for the day's shoot. He died during evacuation before it could reach a trauma facility. The handlers responded immediately. The helicopter was already waiting. Neither was fast enough because the one measure built specifically to prevent the animal from reaching him had been taken down an hour earlier. Investigators determined that the removal of the primary physical barrier, approved under schedule pressure despite handler objections, was the central contributing factor. The lion had not behaved unpredictably. It had responded to a movement pattern in the absence of the one control specifically designed to contain that response. Production was permanently shut down in the weeks following the incident, as legal and financial complications made resuming the project untenable. Footage from the shoot was held as formal evidence throughout the investigation and was never publicly released, with the studio citing active litigation and the Cade family's request that the material remain sealed. Everyone had watched the safe days go by. That's what made one more compromise seem reasonable. Vesper believed that removing one barrier would make the scene more convincing, but the next story shows that the most dangerous barrier a person can remove is the one between themselves and a wild brown bear they have decided to approach on foot. It was May 19, 2022, somewhere in the remote wilderness of western North America, where the morning sat cool and overcast under a low sky, and the riverbank ran soft with mud from recent snowmelt. The tree line along the water was thick with birch and pine pushing into early leaf, and the ground between the bank and the forest edge was marked with animal tracks moving in multiple directions. It was exactly the kind of environment that looked cinematic from a distance and gave very little warning about what was moving through it. The production was a low-budget wilderness thriller built almost entirely on the reputation of one person. Calix Roon, 41, was the independent film director, writer, and primary driving force behind the project. He had built a loyal audience over several years through films marketed specifically on their authenticity. Real locations, real weather, real wildlife wherever possible. That authenticity had become his brand, and his brand had become his standard, which meant every production decision was filtered through the question of whether it looked genuine enough. There's nothing wrong with wanting things to feel authentic. The problem is when that goal starts convincing you that bigger risks are worth taking. The crew had spent several days filming the bear from designated observation zones established established by the guides based on the animal's behavior, the terrain, visibility, and available escape routes. The footage was strong. The bear had appeared reliably near the same riverbank during morning hours, and the sessions had proceeded without incident. The guides had maintained those zones consistently and had not adjusted them across the previous filming days. Calix had grown increasingly convinced the footage lacked the intensity he needed for promotional material. Long-range lens work looked safe, he felt, and safe was not what he was selling. Over the final 2 days, he had expressed his frustration openly and had begun looking for opportunities to close the distance without formally adjusting the approved setup. The crew saw this coming. Once he decided to approach the bear, the only question was how the bear would respond. On the morning of May 19th, the bear appeared near the riverbank while cameras were already rolling from the designated position. Calix picked up a handheld camera and moved toward the animal on foot through the tree line. The crew called out warning. He continued advancing, moving steadily through the undergrowth toward the bear, apparently convinced he could reach a usable distance before the animal reacted. Brown bears across North America commonly weigh between 300 and 700 pounds, with large males occasionally exceeding that range, and can cover ground at speeds approaching 30 miles per hour in a charge. They are not inherently aggressive, but they are acutely sensitive to sudden close-range human approach. A bear that has tolerated observers at 200 yards is operating under entirely different conditions than one being approached on foot through broken terrain. When a bear perceives a direct approach as a threat, the defensive response is immediate and explosive, triggered not by aggression, but by the removal of the distance it requires to feel safe. That threshold is invisible from the outside and is crossed before the person approaching it realizes what has changed. The bear reacted when Calix had closed the distance to somewhere under 50 feet. The charge covered the ground between them before anyone watching from the designated position could respond meaningfully. Crew members moved toward him as quickly as the terrain allowed. By the time they reached him, the encounter was already over. Calix Rune died at the scene from injuries sustained in the attack. The crew warned him multiple times. He kept walking anyway, carrying a camera toward a wild bear in open terrain. There was no reason to expect a better outcome from that decision. Investigators concluded that Calix had moved well beyond the designated observation zones without authorization and against the repeated warnings of crew members, and that this decision was the direct and primary contributing factor in his death. The bear had displayed no prior aggression and had responded consistently with documented defensive behavior in response to close human encroachment. No action was taken against the animal. The project was abandoned. Footage recovered from the designated crew position was collected as part of the investigation. The handheld camera Calix had been carrying was also recovered near the scene. Both devices captured material relevant to the incident, and neither was released publicly, with investigators citing the graphic content and the Rune family's formal request that the footage remain sealed. 41 years old, experienced, and fully aware of what he was walking toward. The bear was not the variable nobody accounted for. Calix was.